Hello and welcome to another episode of That Interview Show. Today I'll be discussing travel, life abroad, education, social issues, a whole bunch of stuff with my cousin Adam Meyers. Today will be a little different because he doesn't actually have a video feed, so it will just be my video feed with his audio. Enjoy the show. Okay, so hello Adam, welcome to That Interview Show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No worries. Alright, so today we'll be discussing life abroad and social issues. But firstly, your interests, because I didn't have enough questions for a good episode, so I figured I'll expand it a little and actually get to know you a bit more. And also so the audience knows more about you as well.
Uh-oh.
So firstly, what is your profession?
So, profession is, I suppose, teaching. I teach English over in Japan. Mostly teaching children, but I also teach adults. So it's really a mixed bag. But I enjoy it. I like teaching. I like teaching English, even though in a way I do feel like imperial scum. But
yes.
You know. Spreading the imperial language all over the world, but
That's
yeah,
right.
I enjoy it.
I don't think if you're a stormtrooper, it's fine.
Not yet.
So why do you teach?
Because mostly I got sort of pushed into it, not out of a not in a sort of negative way, but initially when I came over to Japan. I wasn't able to do any sort of work here because I was on a tourist visa. And then my wife and we ended up getting married, and I was able to start working in Japan. And at the time, I was taking lessons for Japanese. And my teacher, she actually said to me that she teaches Japanese people some English, and she would like a native speaker to come along and help her. And at the time, I was a little bit reluctant to get into the teaching thing. But I went along, and it was actually a whole lot of fun. And then through her, I met someone else. And then through that person, I met someone else. And essentially, all of my work has just been kind of, hey, this guy needs a teacher, or this person needs a teacher. Do you want to teach? So that's how it really came about.
Okay, cool. So you have an interest in media, correct?
I do, yes.
Yeah, what is this interest in media? Why do you like it so much?
I don't. Do you know, I think it's mostly probably an inherited thing. Growing up, Dad used to play all sorts of music, and I used to know other people as a young person who used to make movies and do music, and it just sort of, I grew up with that. And so I suppose it makes sense that I was sort of moved towards that direction as a young person. And then as I got older and the computer age sort of kicked off, I sort of started really getting into computer and media, computers, I should say, and media on the internet, and things like gaming as well I really got into. So all sorts of forms of media on the internet really is what I found myself interested in, as well as film and audio and all sorts of other genres within that sort of spectrum.
How has the internet broadened your range? Like, because you've started doing a YouTube channel now as well.
Yes, I have. How's it broadened? Well, realistically, the internet has, I think it's changed everything. Everything in our society has changed because of the internet. When I was younger, before the internet was really a thing, your two main, or maybe three main sources of media would have been radio, video, or TV, and film. Yeah. All three of those things have really migrated to the internet now, and it's moved out of the hands of sort of these sort of massive media companies and their monopoly, and has gone into places like YouTube and Twitch and all of these other little companies, which allow your everyday user, as it were, to go onto the internet and create their own media. And not only has it sort of allowed more voices into the discourse, and it's allowed more content to be up, and it shows people's different skills, and realistically the tools that are being made for computers these days allow people to do things now that they could never have dreamed of 20 years ago. So all of those things combined have really created this landscape that we have today, which you can be a bum sitting on your couch and become an overnight success.
Yeah. What do you actually do on your YouTube channel? Not to be a shameless plug-in, whatever, but you, having seen it, you do multiple different things, which I quite like.
Yeah, I don't really have an aim, to be honest. I do things that I enjoy. So I sometimes feel like I want to make a movie or video, I should say, about language learning, or whether be about Japanese or another language that I'm learning, or tips and hints that I've picked up along the way studying languages on my own. I also play video games on there because I suppose a lot of the things that I watch online are video game related videos. And I also intend to put other things on there, like games that I'm working on myself, or music that I do, which I am working on an album very, very slowly at the moment. And maybe some videos that I shoot myself if I ever get around to doing so. Just various sorts of things. I don't really have a central sort of a core aim or a core sort of idea at the center of it all. It's just kind of like, I'll throw this up, I'll throw this up, oh, this looks good, I'll throw this up as well.
Yeah, but it's always something that interests you, at least. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't do it if it didn't interest me. If, for example, if I had to take like movies of people learning how to sew, I think I wouldn't have a YouTube channel.
Yeah. Yes, I remember just the other day, Dad and I we just finished watching the film, and it went to a different channel, and it was just people talking to a camera about how they're building a house, yet they weren't doing anything except for making a frame or buying equipment, and other people were being hired to build the house. I'm just like, it must be so boring to film this stuff.
I imagine it is.
I mean, you probably get a lot of money out of just filming a renovation TV show, but yeah, it's just.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see that reflected in so many shows. I mean, things like MasterChef and all of these other shows.
Yeah.
All of the tension and all of the like the competition, everything like that, is created, not from the actual content itself, but from the post-production.
Yeah.
It's all like the way that they've cut it together, the way that they have, the scenes of them talking about their experiences. And that it's all jacked up to make it seem more dramatic than it really is.
Yeah.
And then they have like the tense music in the background because that this is a tense scene. And it's all really fake. I watch it and I'm just like, oh God, please turn this off. It's awful.
Yeah, I know. We've had so many talks this year in uni just about reality TV and how fake it is, and we even watched a show called, what was the pilot episode of a show called Unreal, which is about them making a show like The Bachelor, and how they try to antagonize these people and categorize each of these people in different categories to make it the show seem more interesting, even though everyone's a stereotype.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's it. And it's interesting because realistically, these sorts of TV shows are far cheaper to produce than, say, a drama, because you don't have to you don't have to hire screenwriters and all this kind of stuff for it. Yeah. And it's all basically just like get a whole bunch of willing participants onto a beach or into a house and just film them for 12 weeks, and there you go. You add some post-production, you have a show that you can make millions off, and that realistically to producers is a goldmine, and they like that. And of course there are people that like that media and they'll continue to watch it, and as long as there are people, the majority of people, consuming these things and deciding, hey, this is a really good idea, I'm going to keep watching this, these sorts of shows will continue to be poured out, because at the end of the day it's an industry, it's money, and people do whatever they can for money.
To avoid further questions into how shit media's gotten, let's talk about your other interest being language. So what is your interest in language?
This is interesting. So when I was younger, I didn't really have much interest in language at all. It wasn't until I went to Germany, maybe in 2010. And when I was there, I picked up a few words and I kind of felt like this sense of achievement because I was able to say a few words to people in German. And I kind of thought, I want to learn a bit more. So I kept pushing myself. And I am by no means fluent in German at all. I can understand quite a few things, but I'm not very good. But I noticed as I got into it that my interest sort of drifted into other languages and then learning about grammar and learning about the history of languages and all of these different bits and pieces. And for example, for me, etymology, the sort of history of words, is really, really fascinating because you just see where these words come from. There are so many words in English that were, they're loans of loans. So you have a word that comes from Latin and it'll go into German, then it'll go from German into English, and it'll go from English to French, and then from French to English again. And like so many words in our language come from the same root word, but they have totally different meanings. And things like that to me are fascinating, the way that the languages are built. And so, I don't know, from there I just became obsessed with language. So I've just found myself studying a lot about languages. And I'm really interested in phonetics and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Can you actually speak many languages?
So, speaking is a funny thing, because I don't really speak to so many people. I can read and understand quite a bit of German, and I can speak little bits and pieces, but I'm not all that great at it. Oh, there's a phone going there.
Yes, hold on, let me grab that. It's my mother. Hello, I'm back.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to lock the doors in.
No, that's alright.
Alright, so continue. About your languages and speaking?
So, yes, I can speak some German, I can understand some, I can, understand a lot of writing. I'm by no means fluent. If I were to spend more time on it, I would probably get better at German, but at the moment, I just don't find myself so passionate about learning at the moment, so I don't know, perhaps in the future I'll pick it up again. Mostly at the moment it's just about reading the odd article here and there and sort of maintaining it. My Japanese is probably my strongest second language, mostly because I live in Japan. I speak to my wife often in Japanese, so it kind of makes sense. I also speak bits and pieces of Welsh, Gaelic, and I can understand bits and pieces of things like French and Spanish, Italian, and stuff like that. By no means an expert at it. And I know bits and pieces of Chinese as well. But as I said, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to make myself sound like some sort of language expert. I'm by no means an expert in any of these languages, but I can speak bits and pieces of them.
Yes. Well, I've had many experiences with trying to learn German and Italian and not failing, but just not exceeding as much as I would have hoped.
German's a hard one because it has three genders. It has grammatical case. Both of these things are something that English doesn't really have anymore. Old English did, but these days it doesn't have it. It also has the singular and plural you. So, for example, like in English, we used to have you and thou. German still has that. English doesn't have it anymore. So those sorts of differences can make it quite hard to pick up the languages. I find that it's easier to pick up European languages, of course, because they're closer to English. Japanese has been a real... honestly, it's been a bit of a bitch because having to learn all the kanji, having to, remember all of the words that go along with it, as well as, the grammar being entirely different to English, just all of these things that kind of stand in the way. But I am getting there slowly.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, just paint me jealous because after 9 years, I still don't know much Italian. That was 9 years of doing primary school and high school and having it as a constant subject. Yes.
The problem with the language subjects usually is that it doesn't really focus on immersion at all. It's just kind of like basic sentences. So my name is, I like da da da. That's not the way that I think we should be teaching language. I think we should be teaching language to be constructed, because the first thing I think of when I'm trying to build a sentence is not what my name is, but what words I should put where to actually build the sentence. So I don't sit there and say, I am Adam, and then in my head think, my name is Adam. How can I put this together? My name is Adam. No, it doesn't work. You need to give people the building blocks, and it's like Lego to a certain degree. Yeah. You need to put the right blocks in the right order to be able to get it to work. And unfortunately, I think a lot of courses, a lot of course books, a lot of phrase books, they all miss this point. It's all just, this is how you say, this is my address. But if you don't understand any of the grammar within that, if you don't understand what these words are, you're just parroting a sentence. You're not really understanding the sentence, and that's an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's go into our second subject, life abroad.
Okay, cool.
So this will focus on traveling as a whole and then just, of course, living in Japan. So, Firstly, when did you start traveling?
I started traveling in 2009, so beginning of 2009. So it was just after the massive bushfires that were in Victoria at the time. And I initially moved to England and lived with family for a while there, because they live in the south of England, not far from London. And then I ended up finding work in Scotland, and I moved to Scotland, and then I met a girl in Scotland and stayed with her, and then we came back to Australia for a little, and then went back to Scotland, and yeah, it was quite complicated.
Yeah.
And then in 2013, I decided to come back to Australia. During my time abroad, I'd been to Thailand, Malaysia, I'd been to Scotland, England, Germany, so I'd been to a few places. And then coming back in 2013, I went to China and then came back to Australia. And then whilst I was in Australia, I was studying a little, and then ended up meeting my now wife and moving back to Japan with her because of visa issues, essentially. And then we've not really left now. We're still here. Initially, I imagined it would be a temporary sort of thing, but it's turned into more of a permanent thing. Some days it's a good thing, some days it's a bad thing. So it really depends how I'm feeling, I suppose.
Okay. So on the terms of how long, duration-wise, you've stayed, how many, I guess, countries have you stayed there for a longer than 2-month period?
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4. Yeah, because I stayed in England, Scotland. I was in Thailand for like 2 months. So I guess that is in.
Yeah, that counts.
That sort of,
it's enough
that
time to familiarise yourself with the place, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I lived there, but I was there long enough. Japan, I've been here for, 3.5 years now?
Jeez. You'd make many of my friends quite jealous, actually, now that I realise that so many of them love Japan.
Yes.
Okay, so how long have you actually, so you've lived in Japan for 3.5 years-ish.
Yep.
Why Japan?
Really, it's just because of my wife. That's where she's from, so... See, it's interesting. When I was younger, I used to really like Japanese culture and used to like anime and, be quite into that sort of stuff. And then as I got a bit older, I kind of lost interest and was more interested in places like India and China and Thailand and exploring some of those places. And then I ended up meeting my wife, who is Japanese, and coming to live here. And to be honest, it's not really done me any good in terms of my interest in Japan. It's actually, a lot of it's it's waned a lot. And I found more often that I balk at the idea of anime and manga and all that sort of culture now. Like I look at it, I'm just like, oh God, and it gives me a headache having moved here. And it's an interesting phenomenon. And I kind of wonder sometimes whether, had I been younger, I may have enjoyed it more than I do now. And I also kind of feel a little bit bad for, as you said, some of your friends who really do have a strong love for that sort of element of Japanese subculture. And it kind of makes me think, well, I get to live here and you don't. And that's kind of a little bit, I don't know, unfair in a way, because it's kind of being lost on someone who doesn't really have a huge interest in that stuff.
Okay. So do you actually participate in any of the cultural beliefs or practices in Japan?
So, I do have an interest in certain elements of Japanese culture, but it's mostly the old stuff. A lot of modern Japanese culture I have zero interest in. There are some things I do like a lot. For example, Dragon Quest. I really like Dragon Quest. So I suppose that fits into elements of Japanese culture, and I suppose like Mario Brothers and all those sorts of things. Yes. But when it comes to like anime and manga, I don't really watch or read either of those things. I don't really like cosplay. I don't really like all the maid cafes and all that kind of stuff. I don't like the pop music here. It mostly annoys me. So what I do like about Japan mostly is the old stuff. I like the architecture. I like the old crafts. I like sort of old style foods here. So things like Japanese sweets they call wagashi. And sado, I think it is, like calligraphy and things like that. I like those things. I like those sorts of interesting sort of old style cultural bits and pieces.
Okay.
So yeah, those are the things I engage with most.
That's an interesting way to put it into perspective, because after my parents came back from Japan, it really was that, like, how they're talking about the difference between, the old ancient parts of Japan and whatnot, and what makes the country, like the building blocks of the country, compared to what is now with the culture with cosplay and whatever. It's just I've never really thought of it as such a distinction between the two.
Well, there really is. And something that's interesting is a lot of people, I suppose, look at Japan as like everywhere must be sort of anime and manga. And to a certain degree, it's true. There is a lot of cute characters, everywhere. But most people are not like, Western like anime nerds or, fans. Yeah. As they call them here, otaku. They usually, a lot of people here just kind of like, I suppose, normal as far as you can go with normal. They get up, they go to work, they might go out on the weekend, that sort of thing. Not all that different to the average Australian, I suppose. Obviously there are cultural differences and things that they do and believe that are very different. Yeah. But in terms of being sort of part of this anime culture, they're not really, and a lot of that is sort of a subculture that's kind of pushed off to the side a little. Yeah. And you can go to certain areas like Akihabara, and you can go to Harajuku or Nipponbashi in Osaka, and they have that anime culture. They have cosplay and those events and maid cafes and all of those things that a lot of Westerners are really obsessed by. But for the most part, the rest of the places don't really have that so much. It's just kind of like, shopping malls, buying clothes, doing the average sort of stuff that people do. And then you also have the historical element of things as well, which unfortunately isn't as prevalent as I thought it would be. And I suppose realistically, it's sort of it was affected. A lot of it was affected by World War II, and how much of Japan was actually decimated after it.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole tourist thing, it's like going to Melbourne just for the hipster cafes.
Absolutely,
yeah.
that's right. That's the look at it.
It's interesting because I can understand that, like, the whole shift in culture and all that stuff. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I like to look at how, with my life in particular, how I'm very much into pop culture, but like I can also live just as normally and go out with friends on this day or go watch this film, or but I don't really go out with friends much, so it's mostly just watching films, which I really love. Yeah.
See, I just want to add, I don't wish to admonish anybody who's into like anime and manga. That's if people like that stuff, that's totally fine. It's just not something that I personally really like anymore. I could watch some older stuff from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
But for me, a lot of that culture's also shifted, and I have a teacher who helps me with learning Japanese, and he also said that the culture here has shifted, and it's gone away from sort of in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s being these people who wanted to make these grandiose adventures to a certain degree. Like you look at Dragon Ball, or you look at Macross Robotech. And it's all like sci-fi, amazing sort of interesting stuff. And then you look at what's really being put out now, and it's mostly just kind of school, teenage, high school stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of it's like sort of really catering to what you call it,
like teen audiences and stuff like that. Or creepy old dudes.
Yeah. The old dude fan service. That's the one. Like and a lot of it's like. All of these characters are really sort of just stereotypes, really. There's no depth to the characters anymore.
Yeah.
But if you go back and you look at old games from Japan, you look at old movies, old anime, and a lot of it was sort of... they had a lot of European influence, especially with like knights and dragons and fighting and stuff like that. But they also had a lot of I guess, like aliens and space battles and all that sort of stuff. And that's reflected in things like Legend of Zelda, or well, not the aliens and space battles, but these types of phenomena.
Yeah.
They're reflecting, in like Legend of Zelda and the old Dragon Quest games, and you can see it. You go into some of the old video game stores in Japan, and I absolutely love them. I think going in there and having a look at all the old material, it's fascinating. And the style of animation varied hugely at the time. The types of animation, the subjects, the genres, it's just so much of a variety. But then you go into the more modern section of these places, and it's just, they're all just the same thing reflected over and over and over again. And it kind of, I don't know, it seems like it's becoming such a niche. And to a certain degree, it kind of feels a little like a perverted niche, given some of the stuff that I see walking around Nipponbashi. And I just kind of, I don't have any interest in that culture at all.
I can understand. Like I in my early years of high school, we had this whole section in the library which was just dedicated to manga, and me and my friends always used to read manga, and it was very enjoyable. But as I grew out of it, I grew more into the older styles of anime and manga, so mostly, like, for example, I guess Studio Ghibli stuff, but also stuff like Akira and Ghost in the Shell. And
absolutely.
I have much more of an appreciation for that style of really film and anime, rather than the more modern times of anime.
It's interesting. Something that I learned recently is that animation and comics from the 50s onwards was really a lot of it was inspired by American and even French art, and a lot of it was they got their inspiration from those sort of American DC, Marvel. I'm not sure about French stuff. I know there was a lot of French influence, but I'm not sure of the actual French comic books and cartoons that they were copying or that they were borrowing ideas from. But also Disney as well. Like Ghibli is hugely influenced by Disney. There's so many of those influences. But if you go back just a little bit further, the whole postmodernist sort of just after the time of Van Gogh, a lot of that was influenced by Japanese ukiyo-e. So they were importing these cheaply from Japan, and they were being sold at French markets and Dutch markets and stuff like that. And so you look at like Vincent van Gogh's stuff, and it's hugely influenced by this stuff. He even wrote things in Japanese. I don't know that he understood them, but I know that he wrote them in Japanese. So the influences are really intertwined, and I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. Seems interesting. So let's see. Has experiencing other countries' practices and culture, has it changed how you look at your own culture?
Absolutely is what I have to say. Something that really sort of resonates with me is the idea, and I've noticed it more overseas, especially in Japan and to a certain degree in Scotland. Kind of this idea of humility. Obviously, not everybody's humble and not everybody practices humility. But when I was growing up in Australia, I don't know whether it was the people that were around me or the influences or whatever, but I always found that humility and the idea of admitting that you're wrong or admitting that you're not the best at something was often played down and thought of as something that was really negative. And so as I was growing up, I always found myself in competition and always found myself like, my values never really matched those that were around me. And so as I actually, in a way, escaped that culture and escaped that influence and went overseas and, spent time with different peoples, different cultures, and I learned that, these ideas of, for example, trying to get a job in Australia, and you have to really fight hard to get that job, and a big part of it is selling yourself. And those ideas aren't universal. To get a job in Japan, for example, is more about showing how much of a team player you can be, and it's showing how submissive to a certain degree that you can be. And I don't know that I agree with that entirely, but it shows that these ideas vary from culture to culture, and I could find that it's okay for me to have ideas that don't necessarily reflect those within my own culture, and that was really important for me.
Yeah. Is there anything that forced you to leave Australia?
Do you know, I was just really depressed. I had a really rough time of it at school. I found myself in conflict. I found myself sort of trapped in a sort of I guess an area of my life that I didn't really want to be in anymore. I wanted to evolve and become something different, be more of a reflection of myself. But I found that the culture that I'd grown up with was still, clawing at my heels saying, hey, you can't leave this. You have to remain this. And that was a really big thing for me. And I thought, it really was dragging me down for such a long time. And so leaving and going overseas and doing different things, trying different things, and becoming more confident with who I wanted to be and the things that I wanted to do with my life, that was huge, and it really did. It changed pretty much everything about my life. Before I went overseas, I was just sort of barely getting by. Now that I've been overseas, and I am overseas, I suppose, as well, I've noticed that the confidence in my own decision making and the confidence in the path that I want to take in my life has really increased, and that's a big thing. Whereas when I was living in Australia, I always felt like any idea that I had would always, be criticized by somebody, and that was a really negative thing.
Yeah, it's funny. One thing I really liked about these interviews is seeing how all this stuff that I'm discussing with people reflects back to me. because one of the reasons why I do the show is to learn more about both myself and the people I know. But also just like things in general, like with living abroad and whatever. Yeah. Is living in another country is it difficult, like financially or language wise or whatever?
So financially, for me, it's not such a big thing because I live in a family owned house, so I don't have to pay a huge amount of rent. I don't have to pay like lots and lots of different bills and stuff. I do pay things. I pay for rent and bills and stuff like that. Just not at the same amount as if I would be if I had to rent somewhere else. So in that sense, it's not so bad. I'm kind of lucky in that way. Yeah. But in terms of language and culture and adaptation and becoming used to certain things, and even the area that I live in, it is in some days it's extremely difficult. Other days not so bad. Other days, I can go outside and I feel okay with my life. But sometimes, it's really difficult. And a big part that I hadn't realized would hit me until I suppose it hit me was how much regret I would feel not being with my family. A big part of that is every day that I spend here is a day that I'm not back, spending more time with my grandparents or with my parents, and another day that we all get older, that we all move towards that time where we no longer exist on this planet. And for me, that's a huge thing to sort of come to terms with, because I feel a huge sense of, I suppose, not loyalty, that's not the right word. I suppose responsibility. I feel like people like my grandparents and parents, of course, have had such a huge influence on my life in many positive ways that I kind of feel like by not being there and not spending more time with them, that I'm letting them down in that sense. And also I'm not spending as much time with them as I can, and that I'll probably regret that in the future. So that is something that is hard. Environment-wise, I struggle with big cities. I really do. I wasn't born in the country, but I'm a country person. And at the moment, I live in one of the most densely populated cities in the world. And I find it sometimes really excruciating just walking outside and it's just people everywhere. And mostly people give me the shit. So in that sense, it's really difficult. In terms of language is something that you adapt to, but it can be quite difficult because, when you make mistakes or when you accidentally slip into English or whatever, it's really embarrassing, and that doesn't make you feel good, of course. Being embarrassed is not a good thing. In terms of cultural difference, there are a lot of things that take time to get used to. And in some ways, Japanese culture is easy for me because they don't have a lot of sort of overtly, overtly egotistical people, really. They frown upon that a lot. And in that way, it kind of gels with my ideas of humility and how, it's okay to admit that you're wrong, and it's okay to not have to try and be the best of everything. And it's okay not to sort of talk yourself up all the time. So those sorts of things really gel quite well with me. But there are other things here that I find really difficult as well. For example, what they call joge kanke, which is essentially it means up-down relations. And really it just means like the age difference and the way that people relate to each other based on their age or their position in a company or whatever. I find it really, really... whilst it never really affects me all that much, just being sort of involved or in the mix of this culture, and seeing the way that people get admonished for being the junior in the relationship and the senior has all like the respect and responsibility, even if they're a total arsehole. Those sorts of things I find really kind of hard to deal with sometimes.
How would one, make the move to another country simpler for themselves? Like, if you had any advice for a newbie.
Okay, number one, learn the language. Absolutely learn the language. That's probably the number one priority. If you're going to move to any country, learn the language. Secondly, acquaint yourself with the culture somewhat. Don't go in there blind, or don't go in there with videos that you've watched on Facebook, because they don't really give you a balanced idea of what the culture's like. If you can afford to visit once or twice and meet some of the local people here and use some of the language that you've been learning, that's a good first step. If you can't do that, of course, not everybody can afford that. Try and acquaint yourself as much as possible. Avoid people from your own country, or say America or whatever, what they have to say mostly. I'd say go in there and make your own evaluations about things, because I found that when I read things online, it's either too high praise, or it's too dismissive, or too critical of Japanese stuff. And so there's no balance. There's no balance in between those sorts of positions, and it just adds to the confusion, and it adds to the heartache, really.
Is it worthwhile to travel?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah,
110%.
I definitely agree with that.
I think it really depends on the person you are too, because there are some people that maybe it's not okay for them to travel. Maybe those people that like to cause trouble overseas, don't travel. Just stay at home.
Yeah.
Get arrested or something. But for the most part, I think it's a really worthwhile thing. But it's really, really important, I think, to make sure that you have some idea of what the culture's like before you go to somewhere. Because a lot of people, they'll just essentially act as they do in their own country, or they'll put on the, hey, I'm on holiday shoes, and act like total assholes. And in that sense, I don't think you really get anything culturally from it. You just, act like an asshole and annoy people. And I see it. I see people come here and they'll do graffiti on things because, hey, that's what we do back at home. Or, they'll skateboard everywhere. And Japanese society and skateboarding is a totally different thing to what it's like in Australia or America. And so those sorts of things, like, just have a bit of respect. It's not your home. It's not your land. If you're going to go somewhere, just act like the locals do as much as possible.
All right. Lastly, social issues.
Social issues, yay!
The fun part. All right. So on social media, you're actually one of the only people that I know on social media that's very opinionated. So I'm assuming you obviously believe strongly in your opinions.
I have opinions, and I try to be balanced about things. I try to look at things from different perspectives. I do have strong opinions about certain things, but I'm also willing to sort of listen to other people's stories as well. And my opinions do change constantly. I don't see that as a negative thing. I think a lot of people do see that as a negative thing. You must stick by your guns, but I'm not that strong-willed. I tend to have opinions about things, and then someone might say, but if you look at it from this perspective, and they'll think, that's actually a really good point. So it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, I'm very similar in that aspect. That I may think that my opinion is correct here, but then, perspective is important. Talking about perspective, do you believe that you have freedom of speech?
Do I have freedom of speech? I think that is such a muddy issue. There is no yes or no. I mean, yes, I do in some ways. Other ways, I don't. But then, how far do you go with freedom of speech? And how much of your freedom of speech takes away from someone else's freedom of speech? So it's a really muddy issue. I think a lot of people see it as we have to have freedom of speech on everything, and then some people like, no, we can't have it on this, this, and this. So I think realistically we should have freedom to criticize. We should have freedom to, talk about things that maybe some people are not comfortable about. So, for example, if I say I don't like the left or I don't like the right, and I want to voice that opinion, I think we should be allowed to do that. I don't see why there should be an issue with that. However, if your freedom of speech includes something like, we should burn all white people, then I'm not really keen on that sort of freedom of speech, to be honest.
Yeah.
So for me, it's contextual.
Yeah, it's for me it's more talking rather than actions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On that note, what is your view on society? If that is not a gigantically broad question.
Yeah, we're all heading for impending doom. Maybe next week we'll all be dead. No, if I'm honest, it is a broad question, and I think we'll go back. Go to the fundamental point of everything. I suppose is that humanity is inherently a flawed species. We are all brought up in different surroundings with different people and different ideas, and we're all trying to make it work in this, clusterfuck we call society. And the issue is really that it's really hard to make that work because so many people have so many different opinions and ideas about things. And the way that the human mind is, we're so strong with our opinions and we're so strong with our ideas. And, I'm one of them. I'm a human, so I'm just as flawed as anybody else. That it's really hard for us to move forward with things and to live in some sort of peace or harmony, which is why I don't really believe that some sort of utopian society is possible. Not unless it's run by robots, which, I look forward to our robot overlords. But, I digress. The issue is that, humanity is inherently a flawed species, as far as, you can make those sorts of judgments. That doesn't mean that humanity is inherently bad or inherently good. Some actions are bad, some actions are good, but most actions are somewhere in the middle. And as a society, the fact that, most societies, not all of them, of course, there's some really bad societies out there, but a lot of societies tend to, make sure that people live comfortably and happily and, try to look after the vulnerable and stuff like that. I think that says a lot for humanity. And I think it's really easy to look at all the bad eggs and say, humanity is really fucked up. And I have to be honest, I look at humanity some days and I think, fucking humans. But the fact that we're able to, go for huge amounts of time without dropping a whole lot of nuclear weapons on each other, I think that's fairly good, indicator that society's okay-ish.
Yeah, ish. This is a fun question. I took a lot of liberties with this topic. So, what is your take on political correctness? I feel like I just said that in an American accent.
Political correctness. Political correctness. So, I do believe that there is a line. So, I think that you shouldn't be an arsehole to people. And admittedly, I don't like people being an arsehole to me. I wouldn't like people being an arsehole to other people. I don't think, being abusive or rude, etc. is all that nice. However, I don't think we should counter such action with, violence or, equally sort of furious sort of words. I notice there's a lot of sort of, you can't say that word, that word's not a good word to say. Rather than coming at people with the idea of, I guess, peace and trying to build some sort of balance, coming at people with humility, back to the whole humility thing, people will come up to you and say, how dare you say that, you must be this. So if you have an opinion about something, and of course the identity politics at the moment are absolutely ridiculous. If you are on the right and you have an idea about something, and then somebody from the left will come out and say you're a horrible racist and you deserve to die, or whatever it is, and then people on the other side will come out and say you're, an SJW and you deserve to die, and it doesn't actually change anything. All it is people yelling louder and louder at each other and using violence and really breaking society down rather than helping to keep it stable. So my take on it is that we should probably try not to be assholes to each other. We shouldn't try to attack people for doing things that may be a mistake or for having opinions about things. I think that we should try and approach situations from the perspective of, hey, I'm going to talk about something, but I'm also willing to hear what you're wanting to say, and also trying to find some sort of common ground. I know that can be hard. For myself, I'm not a racist. It's really bad that I have to actually state that, but I'm not a racist. I don't like racism at all, and when I do meet people who are racist, I find myself, admittedly sickened by it. However, I'm willing to listen to what they got to say, and then, I will say, well, to be honest, I don't agree with that, and then, leave the chat or whatever it is, or if they're speaking to me on the street, I don't think there's any point in really confronting people like that, because realistically, and I like to equate it like this, the only outcome from yelling at a wall is a sore throat. And if you think about it like that, when you yell at individuals or when you get into arguments with individuals who have strong opinions or beliefs about something, you're not going to really change their opinion on that. And then saying you're an evil person, you deserve this, that, and the other, you're just otherizing that person. Whether they are an evil person or not, it doesn't really matter. More so for me, it's about being the bigger person. And I think if you don't approach those sorts of people with anger and hate of your own, then it's easier to say, dismiss their ideas, because you can say, well, they're just a nut job. But if you're coming at them and saying, well, you're just, an entitled white person or something, how dare you have such an opinion, blah, 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 yelling, hating, whatever, then you kind of lose that high ground that you have. So that's my view on it. Realistically, I think PC can be a good thing, but mostly it gets used in the wrong way. And so I think we should really try and, we should try and help people, and we should help minorities, and we should help people who feel oppressed and all those sorts of things. But we need to do it in a different way, rather than just yelling at people who don't share those opinions.
Do you think, has in overall society or social values ever treated you poorly? I mean, the obvious factor here being that you're white and male, which I don't give a shit for, because I am also white and male, but I don't use it as a distinguishing thing. But, have you ever been treated poorly by a social group in your life?
Yes, I have. I find that, and I'm going to agree, I suppose, with the feminists to a certain degree on this one, that to a certain degree, Australia does have, I don't really like the term, but I'll say toxic masculinity. But I don't even think that it's really masculinity. I think it's just a certain element of culture, and it goes for men and women. And I find that it's this idea that certain people have to do certain things because that's the gender that they are. And I don't like that. But, I find women and men who do the same thing. I've also been targeted because I'm a white guy and not whatever the race was of this other person. So those sorts of things do exist. And I have been subject to those attacks.
Okay. Last question. And this is really just dedicated specifically to you. Are there any limitations in your life?
Yes, I would say mostly to do with my own mind. I have ever since my teenage years, I've had obsessive compulsive disorder. And so because of that, it sort of emerged when I was about 15. And because of that, it's had a huge impact on the way that I do things in my life. Sometimes positive, oftentimes negative. And I feel like the anxiety that's gone with that has actually, the way I've reacted to situations, I've kind of, I feel like I've been an asshole to people because I've reacted in a way that realistically was me sort of running away from a situation because of the anxiety that it triggered. Yeah, in that sense, I think my own mind is my biggest hurdle in terms of doing things in my life. I just wanted to go back a little bit because we were talking about all the social stuff. Yeah. I just wanted to point out that I don't find myself aligned with the left or the right at all. I refer to myself as a humanitarian. Humanitarian? No, that's not. Humanist. I'm thinking of the wrong word there. Humanitarian is good as well, but a humanist. And I like to try and listen to both sides of the argument. I do find fault with both sides, and I see things that make me cringe constantly from both sides. But I do have friends who are on the right. I have friends who are on the left. I try and listen to both of their opinions and try and find a middle ground and things that I do agree with. But I think a lot of the politics around that stuff is really ridiculous at the moment. And I kind of wish it wouldn't be quite as ridiculous. I wish that people could actually talk about things and not fight and not yell and not constantly say that this group is doing this and this group is doing that. And it comes from both sides, and it's really tiring. It's really mentally draining. And it kind of makes me not want to engage in society at all because you have to watch what you say with both of these groups because whatever you say is going to cause somebody to get upset. And that's not a really good thing. And I think we need to all look at ourselves and think, why is this happening? And for me, a big part of it is humility. I think that you can be humble and not give up sort of your independence or your power or whatever it is that you're striving for. And this can be with anybody. I think that coming to agreements and being able to fight that sort of instinct in your own mind that you need to be right and you need to fight for your rights and all that kind of stuff. Not fight for your rights, sorry, that's not the right word. Fight for what you believe to be the right opinion would be the right way to say it. Fight for your rights is important. You need to fight for rights. Please, fight for rights. But don't fight for your opinion to be the only one that's heard. I think it needs to be a broad spread. You need to listen to various opinions. You need to look at different scientific studies. You need to do all sorts of different things to try and, find some sort of middle ground there. Find balance as much as you can. Because there are opinions that come from feminists that I do agree with. And there are opinions that come from some right-leaning people that I do agree with. Mostly both sides annoy me. But, there are things that I take from both sides. So, anyway, that's just kind of going back to what we said before. But, do you have any other questions for me? Sorry about that.
No, that's actually good. I was actually going to make you think about the feminism topic. Because it's something I'm very... not afraid to talk about, but mainly because, people are going to say this or that or whatever, because I've done my research into the history of it all, into the history of the ideology and where it's born from and how it's developed. I just find it interesting whenever people, talk about feminists now in whatever new wave feminism they call it, being feminazis.
I think we're in third wave feminism.
I think it is too, yeah. But I can never remember what the hell second wave is. I remember what first wave is, and that's the one I think
second wave was like 60s or 70s with people like Gloria Steinem and stuff. I'm not entirely I'm not that read into the subject, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah, because I definitely remember first wave feminism is equality for females and whatever. And I love it how when people pointed that people always think that because feminism has the word, feminine in it, that it just applies to females, whereas it really doesn't and really shouldn't. And how
I think so.
Yeah, and how I like Marxist ideals to a certain degree with the equality for all thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, the thing is that's another thing. You can look at people like Marx and I don't really agree with most of what he said, but I do agree with some parts. And I think this is where getting ideas from different people, getting ideas from different sides, and evaluating people's ideas is really important because, there are people like Marx that I can read most of what is written in the Communist Manifesto or whatever, and I don't agree with it. I don't agree with violence. I don't agree with all of those sorts of ideas. But there's bits and pieces that I can agree with. So I think that's really important to evaluate those different sources. On feminism, I tend to avoid calling myself a feminist because I feel like it's unnecessarily divisive these days. In the past, it didn't necessarily have to be, and it was a women's rights movement. For me now, I do like the idea of humanist more, mostly because I suppose it's less divisive now. The word feminist is a very divisive word. Whether people want it to be or not, it is. And I find that whilst I agree with a lot of things in feminism, I believe, in certain elements of equality and stuff like that, there are other areas that I don't agree with. And because of that, saying to people, hey, I'm a feminist, when I don't believe in these, really, really strongly held beliefs that other feminists have, feels somewhat disingenuous. And as I said, the term to me just doesn't really... it doesn't really fit into the political climate anymore. So I go with humanist just because, to me, it seems more of an even playing field, to be honest. But yeah, I think that if we were to look at certain elements of feminism that I do agree with things like working to try and stop women from being raped or assaulted, or assaulted in their houses, etc. Trying to bring in equal opportunities for people, those sorts of things. I think those things are really important. Also, like taxing women's sort of feminine products and stuff, I think is absolutely ridiculous. Because that's their biology. It's not something that they chose to hey, I'm going to have a period every 28 days or whatever their cycle is. So to me, it seems atrocious to turn around and say, hey, we're going to tax this product because it's something that's necessary. They have to have. So yeah, there are things that I really do agree with feminism, and then there's other things that I don't really agree with. There's a lot of... don't really want to go into it because I know that I'll probably get hate for it, but there are other elements of feminism that I don't agree with. And then I can look at the right, and I can look at, not necessarily on the right, but men's rights activists as well. They are also, I think, right, left, middle, all sorts of areas. But the men's rights activists also have some opinions that I really agree with. I think that men's suicides really need to be looked at, and the amount of men that are dying at work is really horrendous. Those sorts of things. So all of these things, and a big part that turns me off all of this discussion is the group think, the group ideas, the group ideology. I don't think that does anybody any good. I think we should be looking at everything from individual perspectives. So this person's situation is like this, we need to fix it because this isn't good, and etc. And the same could be said for this woman's things and this man's situation and this black man's situation, etc. Look at things from an individual basis and think, okay, does this fit with my universal ideas of how people should be free and how people should be free of torture and pain and suffering? If they don't fit into those sorts of categories, then we need to do something to fix this person's situation. And that is true for men, women, children, aliens, anything.
You mean out of space aliens?
Well, illegal aliens, I suppose. But I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking about aliens as in, little green, grey men, whatever, from Mars.
Yes, that's the classic ones. Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for you, Adam.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
It's been very insightful, which I think I say on every episode of the show because it always is.
Oh, very
yes.
good. I apologize if much of what I said turns out to be verbal diarrhea. I haven't got anything written down, so I don't really tend to think on my feet so well. I need to sit down and plan things properly, but unfortunately, in terms of an interview setting, for me, it's just kind of like, this is a point I want to make. Oh, no, I said this wrong. Ah, God, I'm not good at this.
Yeah, I can agree. Like, I make sure that no one ever knows what the questions are going to be. Like, I brief them before the interview saying, like, oh, we're going to talk about this topic and that topic and whatever, so they kind of have a basic idea. But then, of course, I'm the one asking the questions, and I'm the one who does the scripting for the questions, and which, for me, of course, means I need to know the topic, and I need to know the person, and see how they apply. So, yes, it's good. I find it interesting to see people's opinions on different things, and especially, under the spotlight, being filmed and everything puts pressure on people.
Yes, me being filmed on my avatar.
Yes. Or whatever stock images I use.
Okay, yeah. Do you know what? Just put a monkey on there. That'd be fine for me.
Or I could use
an orangutan.
Okay, how does that apply?
Well, I'm not ginger, so it doesn't really apply at all. But
yeah. I could probably just go with like your YouTube thumbnail or whatever.
Yes, I do have my Arthur the Angry Octopus icon as well. So, yes.
Yeah. Well,
actually, funny story. Sorry, I just wanted to move on for a second. The reason why Arthur the Angry Octopus was that picture. That's actually my icon for my channel. I drew as an example of an octopus for my students. And I liked the picture so much that I decided to make a character called Arthur the Angry Octopus. That's pretty much it. Nothing special about it. But it's just funny how it came about. Just sitting there one day trying to make an octopus, and I made probably one of the ugliest octopuses, or octopi. I don't know what the proper plural would be, but yeah, that's probably. Damn it, Greek. But yeah. One of the ugliest octopi one could ever imagine. So, yes. Not that I'm trying to plug my channel. Go see my channel.
I'll link it in the description as it is. It's if there's a necessity to do it, or like, you're on my show, I might as well be promoting your show as it is, or channel, or whatever.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm happy with it.
Yes, well, you've got a wide range of content, and it really is. It's not a bad octopus.
I like the octopus.
Is there any reason why you've spelt it the octopus with a PWS?
Oh, that's the Welsh spelling of octopus.
Ah, okay.
Yes. So, and Arthur is a Welsh name originally. I wonder actually, because the U sound in Welsh is usually an E sound, so it'd be Arthur maybe.
Okay.
And then octopus, the U. Yeah, in Welsh is spelt with a W, so...
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, you'll know where the audience members, you know where to find them now. Thank you all, audience members, for joining us. I'm Julian, the host. Adam Meyers has been our guest, and yes, he is my cousin. There's no favoritism here, I promise. I've interviewed my uncle and aunt and my grandparents. Next, I got to do my parents, and then my dogs, and then I'll be set.
The dog, I wouldn't interview them. I hear that they're really right wing, so some of their opinions might be a bit.
Yes, and they have a tendency to be either really quiet or really loud. Yes.
Yes. And racist.
Yes, those damn dirty cats. Ah.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Adam, and thanks for watching.
No problem at all.
All right. Adios to both. I guess. Bye. Thanks for watching that interview show. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more if you did. There is a link in the description to the That Interview Show playlist, or just in the playlist tab on Telecreations. If you want to find any more of Adam's work, there will be links in the description as well to YouTube and Facebook stuff. Thanks for watching. Adios.